Hello and thank you for joining. Today we'll be discussing how to properly execute a multiple stimulus without replacement or MSWO preference assessment. We'll start by talking a little bit about what a preference assessment is and what it's used for in the field of ABA, and then we'll move more into the technicalities of how to properly complete an MSWO trial. So to start, a preference assessment, broadly speaking, is a type of assessment that we use to identify potential reinforcers for our clients. It's important for us to note that this doesn't tell us much about the effectiveness of a reinforcer. For that, we might use a reinforcer assessment. However, this is a good start for us finding out some things that our kiddos like. There are several different types of preference assessments. Each of them has their own advantages and disadvantages and situations where they will most likely be used. So clinicians should be aware of that before they make a selection. The MSWO is a good type of preference assessment to use to create a hierarchy of preferences. This can be useful for constructing DRO programs or other types of differential reinforcement programs where a client may be reinforced with a lesser preferred item for less effort in their programming sessions or mediocre responding in their programming sessions. So as promised, we will get more into the technicalities of how to perform an MSWO trial in this section. I have with me a blank copy of the data sheet, a copy of the handout, which you can follow along with, and a few items which we'll touch on in a moment. So there are several steps to completing an MSWO trial, the first of which is to collect the items. In this case, I have 6. You'll typically want to gather between 5 and 8, so we're checking that box. And you want to make sure that these items are your best guess at some items that your kid would enjoy. This can be based on your previous experience with them, a parent report, or even their developmental age. In this case, I'm assuming that my client has a bit of a sweet tooth, so I've gathered some candy. I have with me some Nerds, a Butterfinger, a Kit Kat, a Milky Way, Reese's, and some gum. Once we have gathered all the items we need, it is time to move on to step 2, which is to prepare the array. So we'll want to make sure that we organize our items in this array with enough space between them that they're easily viewed and distinguished by the client. And we'll want to make sure that our items are arranged in a straight line. As such, once we have something that looks like this, we're ready to move on to the next step. So our next step is going to be to prepare the data sheet. So we will include the child's name. We will mark food in this case, since we're assessing food as a reinforcer. We'll include our name as the evaluator and mark the date of the assessment. We'll also include a list of the items used, which again is Nerds, gum, a Kit Kat, Butterfingers, Reese's, and a Milky Way. So once the data sheet is prepared, it is time to move on to the fourth and final step, which is to conduct the assessment. We will start by providing a brief explanation as to the purpose of the assessment. This might be something as simple as, let's find out what your favorite candies are, or let's find out what you like the most. The learner will then be allowed to select one item from the array, and let's say that they select Kit Kats. So Kit Kats will be removed from the array, likely eaten by the learner, and the assessor will then move on to the data sheet. They will mark Kit Kat in the first box of preference assessment 1, and then they will mark 1 of 1 as the item had one opportunity to be chosen and was chosen one time. The assessor will then go back to the array. They will reorganize the array, changing the position of each of the items in the array to avoid positional bias. I want to make sure that it's set up evenly spaced again with enough space in between. And then the subsequent trial will begin. The client will pick another item. Let's say that this time they pick Reese's. The assessor will then move on to the second box of preference assessment 1. They will mark Reese's, and then they will mark 1 of 2, as the Reese's had 2 opportunities to be chosen and was chosen one time. The assessor will again reorganize the array such to avoid positional bias, and the subsequent trial will begin. This process will be completed until all items have been chosen or the client refuses to make a choice. Hello, my name is Kevin Thomas. This is for SPCE 610 Behavior Consultation. It is the summer semester. I have with me Dylan, who will help me to demonstrate how to conduct an MSWO preference assessment. I've currently already filled out her name, that we are going to use food. We're going to be assessing food today, and the list of items that we have, which are Nerds, Butterfingers, Kit Kat bar, gum, Reese's, and a Milky Way. Dylan, are you ready?
Yes.
All right, I want for you to show me what your favorite foods are. So why don't you select one from the group and hand it to me? Kit Kats, great choice. All right, let's select again. Reese's, I love those. What's your next favorite? Gum, everybody loves gum. We've got 3 left. What's your favorite? The Milky Way. Love chocolate. Just 2 left. What do we want? Butterfingers. You're really into chocolate.
Very.
So that just leaves Nerds. All right, thank you, Dylan. Thank you for your help.
Thank you.
So now we will discuss how to interpret the data from our MSWO assessment. As a reminder, this assessment was done with our learner Dylan, by myself, Kevin Thomas, and we assessed food in this particular instance. We used Kit Kats, Butterfingers, Nerds, Gum, Reese's, and the Milky Way in our array. And in our first preference assessment, Kit Kat was chosen first, followed by Reese's, Gum, Milky Way, Butterfingers, and Nerds. And this pattern was pretty stable throughout our trials. However, there was some variation, as you can see here, where Milky Way and Gum switch places, and even here where Milky Way drops from 3rd to 5th. Overall, the original pattern was the order of our client's preference hierarchy. They chose Kit Kats the most often at first at 100%. Reese's shared 50% of total percentage selected. Gum shared 31%, Milky Way 25%, Butterfinger 21%, and Nerds 17%. So if we were going to use this data, we might choose to reinforce our client with Kit Kats for their very best responding, and maybe a Milky Way or Butterfinger for some subpar responding. And if it was just barely passable, we might only reinforce with Nerds. So that is how we interpret our data from our MSWO assessment. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope that you learned something new.